When a college professor looks through those shining glasses at his class, he sees a room full of students who are on the same general educational plateau. Obviously, some are brighter than others, but all at least have reached a certain standard of academic achievement. Before you can enroll in Phil, too, you must have gone through the infiltration course of Phil, I guess. With a preacher looking out on his Sunday congregation, it is utterly different. He sees before him a decidedly mixed grill. Out there are 150-watt bulbs and also 40-watt bulbs. I don't mean to make it so dramatic as to infer that a Supreme Court justice will be sitting next to a street cleaner, or a banker next to a barber, or a nightclub singer next to a nun. But it is the prosaic truth that you will have in the pews many varieties of intelligence and education, all the way from grammar school dropouts to high-domed PhDs. The problem is, how do you arrange a spiritual menu that will appeal to each and offer nutrition to all? No doubt there are other ways, but what I am suggesting here is something called picturesque speech. You speak in images. You avoid the abstract and you employ the concrete. It is as simple and non-shattering as that. Back of it lies the theory that while the uneducated might not easily absorb the abstract, the learned will not be bored by the picturesque. But a vivid Kodachrome style is acceptable to both. To reduce it to perhaps oversimplification, take two notions like winter and industry, both abstract generalizations. Turn winter into a row of clinking white icicles. Turn industry into a cluster of tall chimneys with twisting banners of grey smoke. To both the learned and the unlearned, each idea leaps up, clear and vivid. The less educated understand and the educated are not bored. The patent drawback is that such writing takes space on paper and time in the pulpit, but I hold that it is worth it. Brighter men, I must admit, may disagree. I recall one who quietly but definitely did. Father Frank Connell, CSR, occasionally asked me to look over his manuscript before a radio broadcast. If I happened to find in the copy a split infinitive, or a dangling participle, or an ambiguous phrase, he was delighted. But if I subtly suggested a fresher expression here, or a comparison there, or an illustration anywhere, he would come as close as his gentlemanly character could to a gracious frown. He did not argue the point, but he made no change. You went away with the impression that while he knew you had the very best of intentions, you were unconsciously trying to seduce him to waste God's time. If Father Connell had 5 pages of typescript, these had to be 5 full pages of doctrine. No frills, no tassels, no bonbons, and heaven forbid no humor. Straight, solid, sober, logical doctrine. He was sure he had an eager audience. He never said so, but he acted as if the people out there in the ranch houses and in the tenements were tilting their heads toward that radio speaker, with all the glowing expectation of heirs listening to the reading of Rich Aunt Citronella's will. Or like horse players anxious to learn the Derby payoff. But what realistic preacher can honestly expect such interest? He cannot expect it. He has to deserve it. He has to create it. This may mean that in a 5-page typescript, space amounting to a whole page may have to be sacrificed to picturesque phrases, comparisons, allusions, asides, illustrations, quotations, and the like. Call it what you like, garnishing or ornament or bait or tinsel or whatever. The sad truth is that solid doctrine is too heavy for the average listener. The castor oil needs its bitterness softened by orange juice. This is not homiletic heresy. Our blessed Lord spoke that way. I mean that he preferred the picture to the abstract concept. He did not remind us we had an obligation to give visible good example to our neighbor. He said, "Nobody lights a candle and hides it under a bushel basket." He was not content to call the Pharisees hypocrites. He called them whitewashed sepulchres, meaning a clean, showy front outside, but inside crumbling flesh and crawling worms. Corruption in a Brooks Brothers suit. He did not say, "It is a terrible thing to scandalize the young." He made it vivid. It were better that a millstone be tied round such a man's neck, and he be drowned in the depths of the sea. He did not say, "If anyone is rude, do not resent it." He came in with a picture. If they strike you on one cheek, offer the other, and ponder the parables. What are they but colored films for the television screen of the imagination? The sower going out to scatter his seed, the prodigal son stumbling back into his father's arms, the lost sheep twisting in the briars, the rich man complacently contemplating his row of barns with the shadow of death falling on his shoulder, the good Samaritan bending over the bloody victim by the roadside. Isn't each of these a miniature masterpiece from God's own gallery of the picturesque style? But at this moment our attention is focused not so much on parables as on phrases. Here the picturesque is achieved by replacing the abstract idea with a material physical picture. Better, for instance, than the abstruse word fortitude or valor, or even the simpler bravery, is the frontline soldier, crumpling with a scarlet stain on his khaki chest. Better than Roman legion would be a line of glinting helmets, just as our Savior knew that better than the difficulty of salvation was the narrow gate. The Spanish Inquisition will not pound on your postern gate, And the Tridentine Council Fathers will smile ghostly approval if you speak of the incarnation of the second person of the most blessed Trinity. But Maggie Maguire and Tony Caruso will understand better if you show them God as a pink-faced baby squirming in a straw-bristling crib, and later a blood-smeared body spiked to a splintery cross. Brother Leo once wrote, "Some people are praised for being deep, whereas they should be thrashed for being cloudy. It might, for example, be solemnly impressive to expound. Among the numerous pitfalls that expose an immortal soul to the peril of eternal perdition, perhaps the most dangerous and most precipitate is that of succumbing to temptations against the angelic virtue. But would it not be 1,000 candle power clearer and 100 tons stronger to say, there are many stairways leading down to hell, but only one toboggan slide, lust? In each instance the thought content is the same, but the second version has a brighter wrapper. Notice, you do not change the product, only the package. The machinery that turns out this more attractive package is called imagination. Like hair, some of us have a little, some a lot, and with most of us it thins with age. But unlike hair, it can respond, at least in some measure, to serious efforts to make it grow. Usually recommended as an imagination vibrator is the reading of poetry. Personally, I find most of the modern stuff misty junk, but the old standbys, from Kipling to Francis Thompson, I dig. As a diffident postscript in this matter, may I submit that the liveliest language and the most pictorial style in the daily paper often flourishes on the sport pages. In the old days of Personal journalism, editorials could flame like volcanoes. Now they are often sober, grey-paged treatises. Nobody doubts that in that wide and colourful world of picturesque speech, the one and only king is Shakespeare. You can really reach at random into any play and pluck a vivid example. He did not write, for instance, "We'll rob the monasteries," but "We'll shake the bags of money-hoarding abbots." You can almost see the gold pieces spilling out. Shakespeare did not dully declare, "Excommunication shall not deter me, if there is any prospect of profit." He wrote, "Bell, book, and candle will not drive me back when gold and silver beck me." To him death was not just death. It was yellow bones and powdery dust and grinning skulls and eyeless sockets and a worm like a ring on a skeleton's finger. He achieves his effect by avoiding the vague philosophical concept and employing the specific physical object. Death is a concept. A skeleton is something you can see and feel and perhaps smell. Shakespeare does not have Hamlet rebuke his mother in terms like, "You married so soon after my father died." No, he points out that she married before the shoes that had followed his father's body to the grave were old. The interval is measured in something specific and precise and material, a pair of shoes. When Falstaff reminisces wistfully about how thin he was in younger days, he does not merely say, "I was not always so fat as this." He assures the convivial circle that he was once as slender as an eagle's talon. "God save you, sirs, I could wriggle through an alderman's ring." Caesar was stabbed, and most of us would let it go at that. Shakespeare holds up the purple toga and points out the slashes that went stabbing through. Always the picture, if you want a picturesque style. The trouble is that when Shakespeare writes a scene, we nod and think, yes, that's just the way it happens, and we think. We are very observant and have the artist's alert eye. As a matter of fact, we would never have noticed the sharp details unless Shakespeare had first bumped our head against them. Of so much of life, we are only vaguely aware. Like the tinkle of the typewriter bell near the end of the line, there are so many things to which we scarcely advert. Gilbert Murray showed his own keen perception when he observed that the difference between one man and another is what each can see in the same cubic yard. For that matter, in the same backyard. It is the ideal marriage of observation and imagination that has given birth to most of the masterpieces of literature. Children often amaze with their natural bird's-eye view of things. One remembers the small girl who came home from her first visit to the Museum of Natural History and told her playmates she had just visited a dead zoo. Some men are by nature sensitive to all that lies around them and react to the smallest things. Nature loaded their brain with highly sensitized film. Other men are seismographs and respond only to something as obvious and violent as an earthquake. Even a polar bear blinks at the colored streamers of the aurora borealis, while a poet can feel delight in the miniature sunset mirrored in a doorknob, or the cherry glow of a cigar on a midnight porch, or the black satiny sheen of city streets in the evening rain, and on and on. Like any other good thing, picturesque writing can be ruined by extravagant use. Better not do it all than overdo. Perhaps it comes down to the difference between the soft blending of colors in the Mona Lisa and the flamboyant daubs on a circus clown. They are both paint. A little bit of common sense helps in the production of uncommon writing. We don't have to exaggerate. Lord Macaulay, well, the said Lord T. Babington had a tendency to make every minnow a whale. About a certain sultan, he once wrote, ask him how many men he had murdered. As well ask him how many grains of snuff he had sniffed. It makes great reading. But while it holds your interest, it loses your credence. Of historians in general, Augustine Birrell wrote, "Their name is perfidy. If they have a good style, you can't believe them, and if they haven't a good style, you can't read them. Who wants to have his words airily dismissed as interesting if true? Asked to choose between being dull and being double-tongued, the preacher has no choice. But he need not sever diplomatic relations with truth in order to be reasonably bright and moderately lively. One master key that opens the door to interest is the question, what is it like? Answer that, and you can leave dullness forever behind. To a large extent, literature is founded on the simile. Call it a metaphor, a trope, a comparison, a figure of speech, an illustration. They are all aliases of the same picturesque character. Somebody remarked of Peter Marshall, the chaplain of Congress, that he said nothing new, but he said it in a new way. In saying it differently, a man may reach so far back that it is a cliché, but at least it is a picture, albeit yellowed by time. For example, instead of saying this is only the beginning, you might say, it is only the first course, overture, opening gun, round one, kick-off. Or it could be the entering wedge, the camel's nose, chapter 1, the tip of the iceberg, the first large drops of the shower. Similarly, the end could be pictorialized. Yesterday they closed the book on, yesterday they patted down the last sod on the grave of, yesterday the last leaf fell from the tree of, yesterday they drew the sheet over the body of, this morning they are rolling up the hoses of. Notice, it is always a material thing that is used to express the abstract idea of conclusion, or beginning in similar fashion. If you wanted to say, you would think he was always reading serious literature, it might be better said, you would think his nose was never out of Emerson, or you would think his thumbprints were on every page of Shakespeare. But to return to that handle that fits so many rhetorical tools, what is it like? Take so common a thing as a tree, what is it like? In summer it stands like a great green banner in a parade that has just come to a halt. In autumn it tosses like an Indian warbonate of gorgeous colors. In winter its bare branches are like black antlers tufted with snow. In spring it rises like a fresh new fountain of swishing green. In the pulpit, of course, we need not sonatize nature. We can wax floors or skis, but not poetical. Not to that extent, anyway. The world of nature is good, insofar as it affords good practice. But in pulpit, use your what is it like? Can roam over areas as prosaic as an old shoelace. Suppose, for example, you are preaching on occasions of sin, and let us say that you want to emphasize that the ordinary temptations encountered in our routine life we can, with God's grace, quite easily master. What may defeat us are the temptations that we tease or go out of our way to challenge temptations when we almost literally play daredevil. Here is how we might apply, what is it like, to such challenged temptations. Suppose workmen were repairing the middle aisle of the church and had laid a broad plank about a yard wide on the floor so that people could reach their benches. With a little care, anyone could walk down and enter a pew. But suppose they were fixing not the floor but the ceiling. Suppose the plank were way up there. How many could walk that same distance without growing nervous, losing balance, and finally plunging down? But why? It is the same plank up there as on the floor, the very same width. And you are the same person up, there as you are down here. Why can you negotiate the one and not the other? The difference is this: you had no business up there. When we go where we should not go, we are looking for trouble. To one man, that plank of temptation may be a tavern door, to another a racetrack window, to another a parked car. What good does it do anyone to pray, lead us not into temptation in the morning, and then pole vault into temptation that evening? Get the habit of asking yourself, what is it like? Notice in your reading how good writers do it. I have just put down a book where Thoreau refers to Cape Cod as the bare and bended arm of Massachusetts. When you see the Cape on a map, you say to yourself, that's just the way it is. But it takes the sharp eye and the technicolor imagination of Thoreau to point it out. And who was it that almost scornfully pointed out the easiness of suicide in the lines? The Roman road to the ferry. A bullet, a dagger's prod. Frail is the lock of the gate. You need not wait for God. I can't recall the exact quotation, but somewhere Christopher Morley refers to the red leaves along the edge of an October forest as drops of blood among the brush where wounded autumn creeps away to die. And I think Father Tab makes the same comparison with the precious blood falling like red autumn leaves from the tree of the cross. Speaking of the cross, what is it like? Couldn't we say that looked at from below, it is like a huge dark key, the notches turned toward heaven, because it was the cross that opened a closed heaven to fallen man. Looked at from above, the cross is like a great sword plunged into the hilltop, slaying death itself, because it was the death of Christ that won man eternal life. Looked at from straight on, the cross is like a big wooden bookstand, the open book being those outspread arms, the paper, his pale flesh, the ink, his crimson blood, and written there for all to read, "Greater love than this no man hath, than that he lay down his life for his friends." Greater love no man had, but God had. He laid down his life even for his enemies, yes, even for the likes of us. Speaking of God's enemies, consider the poor fellow who is bogged down in a habit of sin. He himself loathes it. He makes routine efforts to leave it, but he cannot seem to crawl away from it. What is it like? You might compare it to a grimy freighter, scarred from knocking about the world, limping in toward port. It runs aground on a sandbank. Out come the tugs. They huff and puff, and pull and lug, and cannot budge the ship. Then one day comes a tremendous high tide. The water swirls round the hull. Now when the tugs pull, how easily the tramp steamer glides off the sandbank and into deep water. It is like that when a sinner makes a mission, or a retreat, or any spiritual exercises. During those blessed days, the tide of God's special grace will foam and boil around his soul, so that with only a little effort on his part he will slide off the sandbank and out into the clear waters of a clean conscience. So, what is it like? Does not have to drag in sunsets or fountains or lone pine trees or dimpled lakes. Keep it practical. Keep it moderate. Who has not winced at hearing some florid pulpiteer, as he thunders on about how the octopus of this is wrapping its tentacles of that around the something of whatever else? I knew a bishop who spoke that way. We used to call him my wild Irish prose. When you ask yourself, what is it like? It does not have to be answered specifically with a like. Similes and metaphors are best when they are there without that like sticking up like a periscope. Edna Ferber writes of a girl with the face of a Da Vinci cherub and the soul of a man-eating shark. The like is buried in the idea, not distractingly neon-lighted. Or take a phrase like, "The snake rippled down the tree." The image of a tiny stream is built into the verb. Or, "The clergyman thoughtfully tented his hands." Same thing. Too many likes will click like castanets and distract rather than illuminate. But whether we use like or as or swaddle the comparison in the phrase itself, the main purpose is to be pictorial. Avoid the conceptual, favor the concrete. Someone could have said, doubt is negative and unproductive, but what he did say was, doubt builds no cathedrals and sings no songs. It is all a matter of comparison. You compare whatever it is you wish to make clear with something already familiar to your audience, whether you say like or not. Speaking about a belittler, or a downgrader, one man wrote, he would have dismissed the Venus de Milo as a double amputee. Another man wrote about someone's big hand falling on his shoulder. He didn't say it was a hand large like this or that, or as huge as this or that, but a hand so large I could have sat in it, grabbed me by the shoulder. Like or as does not matter, but the comparison, the illusion does. It adds clarity and color and life to the text. Many writers prefer to combine the abstract and the picturesque. They say something first for the intellect, and then say it another way for the imagination. First the idea, then the image. First, a preacher might say, the true Christian remembers benefits and tries to forget injuries. Then he adds, carve benefits in marble, write injuries in the dust. I have purposely not touched upon stories or anecdotes for two reasons. First, they are an obvious device, and perhaps are used too often in sermons rather than too little. Secondly, so few of them are clean bullets that split the bullseye. Most of them are scatter shot that never quite pierce the target. The best stories, it seems to me, are those you siphon from your own experience. The incident impressed you, that is why. You remember it, and for that reason, it is likely to impress somebody else. The second best stories are those dredged out of history or biographies. The latter have name value, and this adds to their clout. Just recently I read something about the painter, Raphael, that might illustrate for a congregation the uncertainty of death. The young never think that the hand of death can fall on their shoulder. But Raphael was only 37, in the golden prime of his career, when suddenly he was dead. Who would ever have thought that the bony fingers of death would have taken the still wet brush out of those strong young fingers, so vibrant with health, so flowing with talent, so eager to reach for fame? In the procession to the cemetery, they carried high on a black draped cart the very painting that Raphael had been working on when he died, the famous Transfiguration. Nothing so touched the crowds along the way as that unfinished masterpiece. Here was the uncertainty of life painted as not even Raphael could paint it, and the signature in the corner was God.